Life on Willow Street had found its quiet rhythm again. The mornings were peaceful. In Aaliyah's kitchen, the kettle whistled its familiar tune as she neatly folded a paper bag for breakfast. The walk down the cracked sidewalk was a comforting routine. Walter Grayson was back in his chair by the window. He was thinner, yes, but there was a new strength in him, a resilience that mattered more than muscle. Aaliyah still knocked 3 times. And every morning the door swung open. "Morning, sunshine," Walter would say, his voice a little steadier each day. "Morning, Mr. Walter." Sometimes, after he finished his breakfast, he'd walk with her halfway down the block. He leaned on his cane, his steps careful but filled with a quiet pride. The neighbors, who once averted their gazes, now offered polite nods. Some even managed to smile. It truly felt like the hard part was over. Aaliyah really believed that. Until the knock came. It was late one afternoon. Aaliyah was at the small kitchen table, absorbed in her homework. Her mother, Renee, was nearby, folding laundry. The apartment was filled with the low hum of the heater and the distant wail of a siren somewhere far off. Then came the knock. It wasn't the soft, gentle rap of a neighbor. This knock was firm, measured. It had a purpose. Renee looked up instantly. "Were you expecting someone?" she asked. Aaliyah shook her head, a strange chill creeping up her arms. Wiping her hands on a towel, Renee walked to the door. Aaliyah followed close behind, a sense of unease settling in. When Renee opened the door, the hallway seemed to shrink. 2 men stood there, dressed in full military uniform. Their posture was ramrod straight, their faces etched with seriousness. The medals on their chests caught the light, and with each glint, Aaliyah's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Yes?" Renee asked, her voice cautious. One of the men spoke, his tone formal. "Is this the residence of Aaliyah Thompson?" Aaliyah froze where she stood. Her mother's hand found hers, a small, instinctive squeeze of protection. "Yes, I'm her mother. What is this about?" The men exchanged a brief, unreadable look. "We're here regarding a man named Walter Grayson." Aaliyah's breath hitched. In a dizzying instant, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her mind flashed with images of hospital rooms, beeping machines, and whispered, worried conversations. She was back in the grip of the fear she thought she'd finally left behind. "Is he?" she started, but the words got stuck in her throat. The officer's expression softened just a little. "Mr. Grayson is alive," he said quickly. "And he's safe." A wave of relief washed over Aaliyah, so potent her knees felt weak. "May we come in?" the second officer asked. They sat at the small kitchen table, their imposing presence making the familiar room feel cramped. Aaliyah perched on her chair, her feet just barely touching the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We've been trying to locate Walter Grayson for several years," the first officer began. "Recent military record reviews brought his file back to our attention." "What file?" Aaliyah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The officer glanced at her. "His service record," he went on to explain, a story of decades-old paperwork, of files lost in the bureaucratic shuffle, and of clerical errors that had buried a hero's story. "Walter Grayson was not just a soldier," he said, his voice firm with respect. "He was a highly decorated officer." Aaliyah looked from the officer to her mother, whose eyes were wide with disbelief, and then back again. "He never said that. He rarely did," the officer replied with a knowing look. They described a mission from long ago, a harrowing ambush where Walter had led his unit. He had held his position under intense fire, refusing to be evacuated until every single one of the men under his command was safe. Several lives were saved that day, all because of his courage. But due to administrative failures, the officer continued, a note of regret in his voice, his commendation was never formally presented. Renee covered her mouth with her hand. Aaliyah's heart was a drumbeat in her ears. She pictured the quiet, gentle man on the porch, the one with the trembling hands and the soft voice. It was impossible to imagine. It took time, the officer said, but the record was corrected. And now? Renee asked. Now, the officer replied, his gaze steady, we intend to formally recognize his service. The room fell silent. Aaliyah swallowed hard. Why are you telling us? The officer met her eyes directly. Because when we finally located Mr. Grayson, we learned something else. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. He had no listed next of kin. Aaliyah felt a familiar pang in her chest. But everyone we spoke to said the same thing, he went on. That if it weren't for a young girl bringing him breakfast every morning, he might not be here today. Renee turned to Aaliyah, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You? She whispered in awe. Aaliyah, feeling overwhelmed, just shook her head slightly. He needed food, the officer offered a gentle smile. Sometimes that's enough. They explained their plan. A full recognition ceremony at the community center, military honors. The medals he had earned so long ago, finally presented. We would like you both to attend, the officer said. And if Mr. Grayson agrees, we would like Aaliyah to be there as our guest of honor. Aaliyah's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Guest of honor? For bringing someone breakfast? We'll speak to Mr. Grayson ourselves, the officer added. But we wanted you to know first. They stood to leave, their movements as precise and respectful as when they arrived. At the door, one of them turned back. He looked right at Aaliyah. Kindness like yours, he said, is rare. And then they were gone. The apartment felt impossibly quiet, filled with the echo of their words. Renee pulled Aaliyah into a tight hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered into her daughter's hair. Aaliyah rested her head against her mother's chest, her heart still racing. I didn't do anything special, she mumbled. Renee held her tighter. You did everything. That evening, Aaliyah couldn't sit still. She paced to the window, staring out toward Willow Street, imagining Walter sitting on his porch, completely unaware of the news that was coming his way. She worried. How would he react? Would he be scared? Would he refuse? The next morning, Aaliyah stood before the familiar blue door. She took a breath and knocked. 3 soft knocks, just like always. The door opened and Walter stood there, a smile on his face. Morning, sunshine. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with a feeling he couldn't quite place. Mr. Walter, she said, her voice trembling just a little. Some people are coming to see you today. Oh? He said gently. What kind of people? She hesitated for a moment. People who remember, Walter frowned slightly, and for a second a flicker of something old and distant passed behind his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, looking down at the small girl who had saved him in more ways than one, he nodded slowly. Well, he said, his voice quiet but clear. I suppose it's about time.
The first time Anya noticed the man, it was raining. One of those dreary, relentless downpours that turns the city streets into a mirror of gray sky and blurred neon lights. She was standing beneath a flickering streetlight, the kind that buzzes and hums like a captured insect, trying to adjust the strap of her oversized bag. That's when she saw it. Not directly, but as a distorted reflection in the dark glass of a closed shop window. Movement, a figure, standing still. Just a little too far to be a casual bystander, yet just a little too close for comfort. He was tall, maybe in his early 30s. His shoulders were broad, filling out a worn dark jacket that looked like it had seen better days. She couldn't make out his face clearly in the watery reflection, but she got an impression of serious eyes, a gaze that felt heavy, even second-hand. A shiver, unrelated to the cold rain, traced a path down her spine. She told herself it was nothing. Just a guy waiting for the rain to stop, same as her. She pulled her collar tighter and started walking, her boots splashing in the shallow puddles that gathered at the curb. The rhythmic sound was usually comforting, but tonight, it felt like a countdown. She walked, and behind her another set of footsteps joined the rhythm, a heavier, steadier tread that seemed to sync with her own. She picked up her pace, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. The footsteps behind her quickened too. She stopped abruptly, pretending to look at a display of books in a dimly lit store, her breath held tight in her chest. The footsteps stopped. A beat of silence, filled only by the drumming of the rain. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. Panic began to bubble up, hot and sharp. She ducked down a narrow side street, a shortcut she knew well, lined with overflowing dumpsters and the back entrances of restaurants. The smells of stale grease and rain-soaked cardboard filled the air. She hurried through the alley, her bag bouncing against her hip, and emerged onto another wider street, feeling a momentary surge of relief, but it was short-lived. A few moments later, as she glanced over her shoulder, he was there again, standing at the corner she had just turned, a silhouette against the alley's dark mouth. Her hands started to tremble, a cold dread washing over her, an old, familiar fear. Instinct took over. Her fingers moved, forming shapes in the air, a silent, desperate question. Why? Why me? It was a gesture meant for no one, a conversation with the universe that she knew would go unanswered. No one on this dark, wet street could understand her language of hands. The man just stood there, watching. That night, she finally made it home. The journey felt like an eternity. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, each sound felt amplified. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She leaned against the door, her body trembling, and slid down to the floor. Finally letting out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for miles. She was safe, for now. The next day, the sun was out, bright and almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Anya tried to convince herself that last night was a product of the rain and her overactive imagination. A simple misunderstanding, but the city had taught her a hard truth, one she had learned over and over again. Men who followed, men who watched, did not mean well. It was a lesson etched into her very being, and her gut was right. He appeared again, not following, not this time, but there, across the street from her apartment building when she left for work. He was just leaning against a wall, reading a newspaper, or pretending to. She saw him out of the corner of her eye as she rushed past, her head down, her heart starting its frantic beat once more. Later that day, he was outside the bakery where she stopped for lunch. She saw him through the large glass window, standing by a bus stop, not looking at her directly, but positioned in a way that she was clearly in his line of sight. He never got on a bus, he was just there, always there, near the library. At the park she walked through on her way home. A constant, silent, unnerving presence on the periphery of her life. He never spoke, he never approached. He never made a threatening gesture, and in a way that was worse. It was a psychological game, a slow-burning terror that was starting to consume her every waking thought. The space between his appearances grew shorter, his presence more blatant. The fear was no longer a shiver down her spine. It was a heavy cloak she couldn't take off, smothering her, weighing her down with each step. Who was he? What did he want? The questions circled in her mind, a relentless carousel of anxiety. Was he someone from her past? A client from her freelance graphic design work? A complete stranger who had latched onto her for some unknowable reason? She scrolled through every memory, every interaction, searching for a clue, a face, a name, but came up empty. He was a ghost, a phantom who had attached himself to her. Her world began to shrink. The bustling city she had once loved now felt like a cage, its millions of people nothing but a backdrop for her personal stalker. She started taking different routes to work, leaving at odd times, skipping her lunch break at the bakery. But it was no use. Somehow, he would always appear. It felt like he knew her schedule better than she did. The feeling of being watched was constant, a prickle on the back of her neck that never went away. She began to see his face in crowds, his silhouette in every shadow. The fear was becoming a part of her, changing her. She stopped meeting friends. The effort of pretending everything was okay was too exhausting. How could she explain the inexplicable dread, the feeling of being hunted by a man who did nothing but stand and watch? They would tell her to be careful, maybe even tell her she was imagining things, but she knew this was real. The silence was the worst part. If he had shouted at her, threatened her, she would have had something concrete to react to. But his silence was a void, and her imagination rushed to fill it with the most terrifying possibilities. Each day, the knot of anxiety in her stomach tightened. She wasn't eating, she wasn't sleeping. The reflection that looked back at her from the mirror was a pale, haunted version of herself, with dark circles under her eyes that mirrored the darkness that had entered her life. This couldn't go on. She couldn't live like this, a prisoner in her own life. The fear had grown from a nagging worry into a crippling force, and she knew she was reaching a breaking point. One evening, after seeing him standing under her apartment window, just looking up, she finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for days finally came, hot and furious, but with the tears came a surge of something else, anger. A defiant spark in the suffocating darkness of her fear. She would not let this man, this stranger, destroy her. She would not be a victim. And so, she did the only thing she could think of, the only rational thing left to do. She took a deep, steadying breath, wiped the tears from her face, and picked up her phone. Her fingers, though still trembling slightly, were resolute as she found the number. She went to the police. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Anya stood at the counter, her hands moving in a blur of motion, signing rapidly. A tired-looking officer tried his best to translate for his colleague, his own signs slow and clumsy compared to her frantic ones. She says, "A man is stalking her," the officer muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Yes, she's deaf. No, she doesn't know his name." His partner sighed, picking up a pen. The questions came, one after another, each one a brick wall. "Did he threaten you?" Anya shook her head. "Did he touch you?" Another shake. "Did he speak to you?" The question felt like a cruel joke. Tears of frustration spilled down her cheeks as she snatched a notepad from the counter. Her pen scratched desperately across the paper. "He follows me every day. Please help." The two officers exchanged a look she knew all too well, a mix of pity and helplessness. "If he hasn't done anything," one said with a shrug, his voice a low rumble she could feel but not hear. "There's not much we can do." Anya felt a familiar, crushing weight settle in her chest, the weight of being invisible, unheard in a world of sound. She walked out of the station, the bell on the door a silent announcement of her failure. That evening the familiar dread returned. The walk home, usually a short 10 minutes, felt like an eternity. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps behind her. She walked faster, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She told herself it was just paranoia, just the city at dusk. But then, she saw him. He was there, under the sickly yellow glow of a streetlight, just as he had been for the past 2 weeks. He was always at a distance, a constant, silent presence on the edge of her vision. But tonight was different. Tonight he moved. He stepped out from the shadows, closing the distance between them. Anya's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment she had been dreading. Her mind raced, replaying the officer's dismissive words. No one would help. No one was coming. She was utterly alone. She fumbled in her bag for her keys, her fingers clumsy with fear, ready to use them as a weapon. She raised her hands defensively, a silent plea for him to stay back. Her body tensed, preparing for an attack that felt inevitable. But he didn't lunge. He didn't touch her. He simply stopped a few feet away, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. In one hand, he held a small, crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, as if not to startle her. On it were hand-drawn diagrams of signs, little arrows indicating movement. He looked from the paper to his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, he looked at her, his eyes full of an emotion she couldn't quite place. It wasn't malice. It wasn't anger. It looked nervous. Then, he signed. His movements were awkward, clumsy, and nothing like the fluid grace of her native language. It was like watching a child learn to write their first letters. He fumbled, corrected himself, and tried again. But the meaning was unmistakable. 5 simple words, formed with painstaking effort. "I am learning." He pointed to the paper, then to his hands, then to her. "For you," Anya froze, her defensive posture slowly melting away. Learning for her. The fear that had been her constant companion for weeks began to recede, replaced by a wave of stunned disbelief. This man, this terrifying shadow she had built up in her mind, wasn't a predator. He was a student. The countless times she had seen him, he wasn't stalking her. He was observing, trying to learn the beautiful, silent language she spoke. He had seen her, truly seen her, not as a problem or a disability, but as a person he wanted to know. In the middle of the lonely city street, under the dim glow of the streetlight, a connection was made. Not with words, not with sound, but with the simple, profound effort of one person trying to understand another. The silence between them was no longer filled with fear, but with a new and fragile possibility. For the first time in a long time, Anya didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. His name was Daniel Reed, a single father, a construction supervisor, a man surviving on little sleep and a whole lot of stubborn hope. His world revolved around his 6-year-old daughter Lily, who hadn't spoken a single word in over a year. The doctors had a name for it: selective mutism, a silence born from trauma. Lily had seen something no child should ever see. She was there when her mother, in the middle of a laugh, suddenly collapsed in their sunlit kitchen. A brain aneurysm. One moment, a family of 3. The next, a world shattered into a million silent pieces. And from that moment on, Lily's voice disappeared. Daniel tried everything. He poured his savings into therapy sessions and consultations with specialists. He practiced endless patience, waiting for a whisper that never came. The silence in their home was deafening, a constant, heavy reminder of what they had lost. He read her stories every night, hoping his voice could somehow fill the void left by hers. But Lily's world remained locked away. Then, one afternoon, a flicker of light. Lily came home from school clutching a crumpled piece of paper. It was a flyer from the community center. Free signed language classes, it read in bold letters. Daniel later recalled the moment with a catch in his throat. She didn't speak, he said. She just pointed. It was the first spark of interest she had shown in anything since her mother died. It was a sign, in every sense of the word. Without a second thought, Daniel enrolled them. He would learn a whole new language if it meant he could hear his daughter again, even if it was just with her hands. That first evening, walking into the brightly lit community center room felt like stepping into a different world, and that's where he saw her Anya. She was the instructor, moving with a grace that was both gentle and powerful. Her hands danced through the air, telling stories, asking questions, creating a language out of thin air. She had a soft, reassuring smile, and even though she was silent, she commanded the entire room's attention. Daniel watched as Lily's eyes, usually so distant and clouded, locked onto Anya. She was mesmerized, watching the teacher like she was witnessing real magic. And then, something incredible happened. Anya signed, "What's your name?" and gestured toward Lily. Daniel held his breath. Slowly, hesitantly, Lily's small hands lifted. She fumbled with the shapes, but she signed back Lally. It was a miracle. A tiny, silent conversation that screamed with hope. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as he watched his daughter communicate for the first time in a year. As the weeks went by, Lily blossomed. Her hands became more confident, her signs clearer. She started talking about her day, about the colors she liked, about the dog she saw in the park. She even started to smile again, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Anya had given them a gift beyond measure, a bridge back to each other. Daniel found himself looking forward to the classes, not just for Lily, but to watch Anya. He admired her patience, her warmth, and the way she had unlocked the world for his daughter. He started noticing other things too. He noticed that Anya always left the community center alone, her bag slung over her shoulder as she disappeared into the darkening streets. He saw the way some men would stare at her as she walked by, the way she would subtly pull her coat tighter and quicken her pace. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes when footsteps behind her grew too close. A protective instinct, raw and powerful, surged through him. He couldn't just let her walk home alone like that, vulnerable in the shadows. So, he started following her. He kept his distance, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice him. He'd watch from across the street, a silent guardian angel, until he saw her safely unlock her apartment door and disappear inside. He told himself it was just to make sure she was okay. She had saved his daughter, and this was the only way he knew how to repay that kindness, to protect the woman who had brought light back into their lives. It felt right. It felt necessary. But there was one crucial detail Daniel hadn't considered. One terrifying truth he was about to discover. Fear feels so much louder when you live in a world of silence. And for Anya, the feeling of being watched, of being followed, was a nightmare she was already living. His quiet protection was becoming her silent terror. One evening, as he watched her from his usual spot, she suddenly stopped under a streetlight, her shoulders tense. She spun around, her eyes wide with panic, scanning the empty street. Her hands flew up, signing frantically to the empty air. "Who's there? Show yourself." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He had wanted to be her protector, but in his own silent way, he had become the monster in her shadows. He had to fix this. He stepped out from behind the parked car, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, ready to explain, ready to face the fear he had so carelessly created. The silence between them was broken only by the frantic beating of two very different hearts. What happens when your silent protector is also the source of your greatest fear? The story is just beginning. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Thanks for watching. Can you imagine one single moment changing your entire life? A moment you didn't even know was happening. This is the story of Daniel, Anya, and a video that nearly destroyed everything. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Someone, just a stranger with a phone, recorded Daniel walking behind Anya on the street. It was a few seconds of footage, completely out of context, but that didn't matter. The video was uploaded with a caption that read, "Creep stalking disabled girl, shared to expose him." And just like that, a match was lit. Overnight, the video exploded. It went viral. Shares, comments, angry emojis, was a digital wildfire. By morning, Daniel's world was engulfed in flames. He was suspended from his job at the community center where he taught sign language. The parents he'd worked with for years, parents who had trusted him, were now pulling their children from his class. The community center, a place he considered a second home, was demanding answers, their doors closing on him. For Daniel, a man who dedicated his life to helping others communicate, the world had suddenly gone silent, except for the deafening roar of online accusations. He was judged, convicted, and sentenced by a jury of strangers on the internet, all before he even had a chance to speak. Meanwhile, Anya woke up to a nightmare she never asked for. She saw the video, her own face now a symbol of victimhood, a symbol of fear. Her stomach dropped. She, a girl who navigated the world with a quiet strength, was now at the center of a storm of misplaced pity and outrage. The video didn't show her journey, her resilience, or her independence. It just showed a disabled girl being followed. She was reduced to a label, her identity stolen and replaced by a hashtag. The digital world is fast, but the real world catches up even faster. That afternoon, a public meeting was called at the community center. The room was packed, buzzing with anger and suspicion. It felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. Voices rose, each one louder than the last. Accusations flew like stones. The word police was thrown around. And there, at the front of the room, stood Daniel, alone. The crowd's anger was a physical force, pressing in on him from all sides. He looked out at the faces. Some were furious, some were confused, some were just there for the drama. He spoke, his voice quiet but steady, a small island in a sea of noise. "I never touched her," he said. "I only wanted to protect her." His words were drowned out. "No one believes you," someone shouted from the back. The sentiment rippled through the room. Doubt was a poison, and everyone had taken a sip. In that moment, Daniel was completely isolated. The community he had served, the people he had taught, had turned against him based on a few seconds of a stranger's video. It seemed like there was no way back. His reputation was in tatters, his career in ruins, and his spirit was on the verge of breaking. Just when the noise reached its peak, just when all hope seemed lost, a small figure pushed through the crowd. It was Lily, Daniel's young daughter. She was small, and the room was large and intimidating, but she walked to the front with a determination that silenced the murmurs. She stood beside her father, her hands shaking but her eyes were clear. And then, she began to speak. Not with her voice, but with her hands. She raised them, and in the sudden, heavy silence of the room, her fingers started to dance. It was sign language. The language her father had taught her. The language he taught so many others in that very room. Her signs were clear, deliberate, and full of a child's unwavering truth. She signed, pointing to her father, "teaches me how to speak without words. He teaches me to be brave." The crowd watched, captivated. The anger began to melt away, replaced by a dawning curiosity. Lily continued, her small hands telling a story that no one had bothered to ask for. "My dad," she signed, her expression earnest, "followed Anya so she wouldn't be scared walking home alone. He told me he worries because the world isn't always kind." She paused, taking a breath, her gaze sweeping across the faces in front of her. Then came the final, powerful statement. "My dad is not a bad man. My dad is my hero." The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The digital rage that had filled the space just moments before had evaporated, replaced by something else entirely. It was the quiet, undeniable power of truth. Lily's silent words had spoken louder than all the shouted accusations combined. And then, another person stepped forward. It was Anya. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't crying from fear or shame. There were tears of relief, of recognition. She walked to the front and stood beside Daniel and his daughter, forming an unlikely trio against the world. She looked at Daniel, and then at the crowd. Her voice, when it came, was thick with emotion but strong. "He saved me," she said, her words cutting through the stillness. "He saved me, and he didn't even know it." She explained how every day she walked home with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, always looking over her shoulder. She spoke of the loneliness she felt, the quiet fear of being vulnerable in a world that wasn't built for her. "I thought I was alone in that feeling," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I thought no one saw. I thought no one cared." She looked at Daniel, a deep, profound gratitude in her eyes. "But I wasn't alone. He was there, not as a threat, but as a guardian, a silent protector I never knew I had." As she spoke, a change swept through the room. The phones that had been held up to record the drama were slowly lowered. Faces that were twisted with anger softened with shame, then with empathy. People started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the quiet, personal tears of people who realized they had been part of a terrible mistake. They had been so quick to judge, so eager to condemn. The truth had finally spoken. It didn't have a viral hashtag or a million shares. It arrived quietly, in the signing hands of a little girl and the brave words of a young woman who refused to be a victim. That day, the community center wasn't just a room full of people, it was a classroom. Everyone learned a powerful lesson about the danger of snap judgments and the speed at which a lie can travel. They learned that behind every screen, every profile, every viral video, there are real human beings with real stories, and those stories deserve to be heard, not invented. The video didn't disappear from the internet, but its power was broken. The truth, once revealed, began its own slow but steady journey online, with people sharing apologies and corrections. Daniel got his job back. The children returned to his class, but things weren't quite the same. The scars remained, a reminder of how fragile trust can be and how powerful a weapon a camera can be in the wrong hands. This story asks us a question. In a world where we can broadcast anything in an instant, what is our responsibility? Is it to capture and condemn, or is it to seek to understand? Before you share, before you comment, before you judge. Maybe the most important thing to do is to simply pause and ask, what's the real story here? Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content that makes you think. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. After the incident at the university, everyone expected a lawsuit, a public outcry, a demand for justice. The air was thick with anticipation. What would Daniel do? This man who had been so fiercely protective, so relentlessly present, how would he react to the public humiliation of the person he seemed to care so much about? The community held its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm, but the storm never came. What happened next shocked everyone, and I mean everyone. Daniel didn't sue the university. He didn't demand public apologies or retractions from the news outlets that had smeared Enya's name. He didn't go on a crusade for revenge. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. Something that seemed almost illogical to the outside world. He sold his car. It wasn't just any car. It was his prized possession, a vintage model he'd spent years restoring. It was his escape, his hobby, his one personal luxury. He sold it without a second thought. With the money from the sale, he didn't buy a new car or invest it for himself. He poured every single penny back into the very community that had, in some ways, failed Anya. His first project was creating a free night escort program. He'd seen the fear in Anya's eyes walking home alone, and he realized she couldn't be the only one. So, he set up a volunteer service specifically for women with disabilities, ensuring they had a safe way to get home after dark. He hired security personnel, coordinated volunteer schedules, and set up a dispatch system. It was a beacon of safety in a city that often felt dark and dangerous. But he didn't stop there. He knew the root of the problem wasn't just physical safety. It was the inability to communicate. The feeling of being invisible and unheard. So, he took the remaining funds and invested them directly into what Anya loved most, sign language. He funded more sign language classes, not just for the deaf community, but for everyone. He wanted to build bridges, to tear down the walls of silence that separated people. He envisioned a community where a hearing person could casually sign hello to a deaf neighbor, where communication wasn't a barrier but a shared experience. And then came his most significant move. He hired Anya, not as a volunteer, not as an assistant, but as the lead instructor for the entire expanded program. He gave her a formal contract, a competitive salary, and complete creative control over the curriculum. For the first time in her life, Anya had stability. She had a purpose that was recognized and valued by the world. She had a voice, a powerful one, that she could now share with hundreds of students. She wasn't just a poor, deaf girl anymore. She was Professor Anya. She was a leader. Her classes were always full. Her passion was infectious. She taught with a grace and an energy that captivated her students. She showed them that sign language wasn't just a substitute for spoken words. It was a beautiful, nuanced language in its own right, a form of poetry expressed through motion. She was finally seen. She was heard. About a month after the program launched, something incredible happened. It was a quiet afternoon. Anya was at home with Lily, her little sister. They were playing on the floor, surrounded by books and toys. For years, Lily had been silent, locked in her own world. Doctors had given them little hope that she would ever speak. Anya had never given up, always signing to her, reading to her, surrounding her with love. And on that day, as Anya signed the story of a brave little bird, Lily looked up at her. Her small lips parted, and a sound came out. It was soft, unsteady, barely a whisper, but it was clear. The first word she ever spoke was Anya. It was a miracle, a testament to the unbreakable bond between two sisters, and a symbol of the new hope that had entered their lives. In that single word, years of silence were broken. Anya held her sister tight, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. From that day on, Anya no longer walked alone. She was surrounded by her students, by the women she helped keep safe, by a community that was slowly learning her language. She didn't lower her head in the streets anymore. She walked with her shoulders back, her gaze confident and direct. She would meet the eyes of strangers and offer a warm smile. And more often than not, someone would sign a simple good morning back to her. She was still deaf. By society's narrow standards, she was still poor. But she was rich, incredibly rich, in something she had never known before, a sense of belonging. She had found her tribe, her family, her place in the world. And Daniel, he stopped following her. He didn't need to anymore. The silent guardian angel faded back into the quiet rhythm of the city. He'd see her sometimes, laughing with her students, her hands dancing in the air as she told a story, and he would smile. His mission was complete. Anya no longer needed his protection. She had found her own strength. She had found her voice, a voice that resonated louder than any sound, and it was a voice that was changing the world, one sign at a time. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that we hope will inspire you.